When life gives you lemons, equip Power Bounce, give yourself a +3 attack buff, and jump on Lemon's head. Or I guess that's the moral of Paper Mario. Whatever you think the true meaning is behind the madness, few things play as much of a role in the game's proceedings as damage, and the game really wants you to deal damage. Compared to other RPGs, the Paper Mario series has always prided itself on using smaller numbers, because hitting a 3 HP enemy for 2 somehow feels a lot better than dealing 12,000 damage to an HP pool from a Caribbean resort. At least it did, until they decided that even those numbers were too large and removed them altogether. So with TTYD having small, digestible health values, how much damage do you actually need to deal to beat the game? Who asked? No one, but we're gonna find out anyway. Quick explanation of something I'd probably need to post as a comment if I didn't say it here: if we overkill something like it owes us money, I'll only be counting the health it had. Also, some enemies have multiple targets with their own HP, and hitting them would count, so we're just not gonna do that. I'll try to mention anything else as it becomes relevant, so yeah, let's just get into it. The Prologue. The story hasn't even begun and I need to explain something. I started off going to the shop as normal, but with a grocery list from Spirit Halloween. Once I packed my bag with as many masks as I could carry, I could easily finish off the first mandatory Goomba fight without dealing any damage. This is the main reason I'm playing the original version and not the Switch remake. That's the bad future version. Spirit Halloween is out of business. This shop has some key items throughout the game: the contact lens and the Super Luigi series. In the Switch version, their spot is held in advance for some reason, and the Fright Mask is a sacrificial lamb. So to get masks early, we gotta boot up the Entertainment Prism. Now, I know what many of you are probably thinking: that's cheap, Fright Masks are lame. Well, so are arbitrary rules on intended game mechanics. I did heavily consider the best option, but we're not here to find the minimum damage to beat the game with random restrictions. In the interest of actually answering the question, we're using any options the game gives us to avoid dealing damage. At first, I didn't know if this would be glitchless or not, and spent a good Friday afternoon drowning Mario until I was able to pull off Prologue skip, which I explained in a past video. After this, I quickly remembered the problem with allowing glitches. You can do a lot with them, or I guess not a lot. You can basically skip most of the game. But a lot of those glitches are borderline tasks only for the casual mortal being, and if I banned those ones, then it'd be totally arbitrary what was and wasn't allowed. It was at this point I decided the run would be glitchless. So if you're wondering where the audience is or why the star power gauge took a sick day, that's why. I've already had to make several executive decisions, so I could certainly see the possibility of making a follow-up video exploring the other dimensions of this question. So look forward to that, I guess. But don't worry, the only fight we skipped was the blooper, and I went back for him later, so his tentacles are accounted for. So that finally brings us to Chapter 1. Given what we're hoarding in our bag, you can probably gather how this run is going to start. Every enemy in the early game is vulnerable to fright, at least until the Gold Fuzzy. This is going to be a recurring trend. Bosses will be the main source of damage in this challenge. If we laid even a finger on the Fuzzy Horde, we would be adding unnecessary damage to the count. So after using the easier dodge on them, the Gold Fuzzy is dead. I don't think there's many challenges that could make him difficult. With the stones in hand, we can get to Hooktail Castle. We'll just avoid the enemies when possible, but the next boss, Red Bones, is a bit of an issue. And not just because he's pink, not red. Dull Bones are a bit of a pain because they only have a 10% chance to be frightened away, and this spooky cherry skeleton has a 0% chance. I wasted way too much time trying to ace all 4 of his minions with one mask before just giving in and using 2 or 3. After just narrowly escaping from the castle's infamous traps, we can ignore most encounters and reach the boss of this chapter. This Jumpscare Goomba. I swear it's a coin flip if you get a chance to avoid him or not. Hooktail herself is pretty normal. Her heal during the fight is scripted, so that's a mandatory 30 HP to end the chapter. And no, the damage dealt to my mind by doing the Peach intermissions for the 5,000th time doesn't count. Chapter 2 is next, for those who can't count that high, and we start off with something important. Large Cloud Wind Woman Spirit, I think, whatever she is. We took our masks back for a refund and got a pocket celebrity with Gale Force, which is now the foundation of this run. I have played this game more times than I can remember, and somehow I didn't know until now that unlike the Fright Mask that grants no XP, Gale Force actually gives you the full experience points for every enemy blown away. For the sake of the challenge, we'll still be avoiding enemies as much as possible, since our only means of ending the fight costs almost our entire base FP. We sent the 3 shadows to the opposite of the Shadow Realm, and we get the joy of the Puny's company. Only if they feel like it. We have a few mandatory X-Naut encounters, but I was somehow able to make it through this room without a fight, which I was genuinely not expecting. I gave in and dealt with these Piders so I could actually get the Punies across the narrow bridge. Thankfully, for spiders, they're surprisingly weak to wind. And so are Jabbies. You know what, everything's weak to wind in this game. It's like it's made of paper or something. With A super boots acquired, we can make our way to the bottom of the tree, stand dumbfounded until a star gets stolen, get ambushed by another mandatory fight, and face Magnus von Grapple. During his fight, he can launch out his fists, which have their own health. We can't kill them, so it was vital to end this fight as quickly as possible before the punch damage could become an issue. But that gets us the second crystal star, with, I don't know, some amount of damage. I'll probably put it on the screen right now. And now we're going into Chapter 3, the chapter built entirely around. You might remember, in the arena, every fight is given a rule, like no hammer or appeal at least once. Some of these can cause an issue. For example, no FP means we can't use Gale Force. And if we don't meet these conditions, then we need to refight, which is more unnecessary battling. Some conditions are a bit risky. Later on, we might be asked not to attack for several turns, and we can't use super defense to evade all the damage or we'd deal damage ourselves. So we need to hope for good rules. Basically anything that doesn't prevent Gale Force. This move is apparently a Category 5 Hurricane because it makes light work of the entire minor league without a single miss, but the Armored Harriers are the immovable object to our unstoppable force. After getting a new companion, we promptly walk away. The humiliation was too much and Mario gave up. The end. Back at Rogueport, I level Yoshi up before retrying the fight, all just for this one interaction. If you deal enough damage to one-shot the twins, you'll skip their dialogue about finding their weakness, but one is still left with 1 HP for some reason. The conditions in the Major League are worse, but as long as we hit the dice roll, these guys are no better against extreme winds. The damage in this section is Bowser, because why the hell not, and the Iron Adidas twins, because sure. And fun fact, if you skipped the twins' dialogue earlier and then forgot to buff Yoshi this time, they'll announce now, as they're about to be defeated for the second time, that you may have found their weakness. Finally, the ultimate showdown against. I'm so used to self-imposed challenges in this game, I forgot how much you can just humiliate the first half of this game with Clockout. Technique versus technique, raw power versus raw power, he didn't even get to move. I guess since that was so quick, I'll point out that Rockhawk does have a way to heal, but given his incredible difficulty, most people have probably never seen it. Coming soon to theaters, unironically, is Chapter 4. I wasn't sure exactly how this was going to play out. Our lifeline has been Gale Force, and in this chapter, Flurry runs off with another Mario. Once I began the chapter, I remembered that this is whatever the opposite is of. You can skip basically every fight apart from Dupless himself. Interestingly, if you bully him too hard, the game shows pity and grants him up to 10 health when he clones you. So to minimize damage dealt, we need to let him clone you before dropping his health below 10. Since this chapter is mostly battles and backtracking, there's not really much to talk about in this one. And Dupless is easy. But this is when things get a bit more complicated. Especially since we didn't fight any Amazy Daisies for their crazy XP, we are now way below the level we'd normally be. Surely this won't become a problem in 30 seconds. For now, we sail onwards to Chapter 5, where, after like 10 minutes of dialogue, I forgot I was doing a challenge and murdered this Ember in cold blood, so I had to do it again. Mario is a good person in this run, a truly benevolent plumber of virtue. He wouldn't harm anyone he doesn't need to. Not fighting enemies made these rooms in Keel Hall Key that much more tedious than they already were, but finally we recruit Bob the Unbuilder and clear this statue puzzle. This was a big mistake, but we'll cover that in a minute. Entering the cave, we're welcomed by scary voices, fire spirits, and cannons. These two cannons could make me throw a DSLR in the trash out of principle. Throughout the game, Bill Blasters are found in pairs, and through a sweaty 5 minutes of high-intensity research, it seemed all of them could be skipped, except this one. Looking at the wiki, that one doesn't exist, Bill Blasters are actually vulnerable to Gale Force, with a 15% chance. But this is where I discovered the hidden complexities of Gale Force. Every enemy in this game has a programmed value for their weakness to Gale Force, a number out of 100, so basically a percentage. But this isn't the final chance. For starters, how well you do on the action command affects the odds a lot, but there's actually more to it than this. Every enemy is also programmed with a level, just like how Mario has a level. Very useful information that you have no means of seeing in-game. The difference between the enemy's level and Mario's level is subtracted from the base odds. Clefts, for instance, have a 70% chance and a level of 12, so if Mario was level 5, the final chance would be 63%. If Mario's level is higher, the odds will go up, but if Mario's level is lower, the odds go down. Bullet Bill launchers have a base chance of 15%, and a level of 22, and at this point, Mario's level was 7. If you're able to do mental math, that puts the odds at precisely 0. At my current level, it was impossible to affect them with Gale Force, so I had to grind some levels. Of course, using only Gale Force. That brings us back to the statue puzzle. If you enter it wrong, you're attacked by 3 embers. This can be done infinitely, and makes for one of the best XP grinding spots in the game. Embers are highly susceptible to Gale Force, and grant a good amount of XP. Problem is, I already entered the cave, so they won't show up. I had to make do with the enemies in the cave, which only respawn if you leave the cave entirely. Eventually I settled with 2 more levels, which gives us a whopping 2% chance against the Bill Blasters. So now all I need to do is refight the Bullet Bill launchers. This took 2 hours. I'd love to say things got better, and they did, absolutely. Thundering Diarrhea would be better, but things are definitely getting harder than they were. Enemy levels are scaling much faster than we are, and their base weakness to Gale Force is falling, so we really need to avoid any fights possible. Thankfully, we can skip all the remaining Bill Blasters, and the mandatory fight for the Black Key is just Embers, so we quickly reach Cortez. And that also means we quickly kill Cortez, because what do you mean he has 20 HP in Chapter 5? That's the same as Hooktail. He does have 3 faces, but we have Power Lift, so that's an easy 60 HP of damage done. It's a bit broken that it resets to your turn on each phase transition, but I can't complain. This chapter does have a second boss though, another encounter with Lord Grump and his Extranauts. The X-Nauts can stack up a decent amount of damage since we can't kill them and need to focus only on Crump, but we can super defend most of their forms without dealing damage. So with him dead, again, we're steaming our way into Chapter 6, which is known for having mystery, drama, and no battles. At least not for the first half of the chapter. Of course, this is the best chapter in the game, no I'm not biased, but we can just cut right to Riverside Station, where we actually want to think about these gears since falling probably means landing on and first striking an enemy. We have 3 whole mandatory fights here. Yeah, Goombas. You need to fight these guys. Of course, the Gale Force chance is probably way above 100% for them now, so we can lower the bridge and return to the train. The boss of this chapter is the Smorg, which start the battle off with 3 tentacles. Unlike the blooper, you can actually target its body even while the tentacles are out, but as far as I can tell, it's totally invincible. Once you kill its tentacles, you can damage its body, but after a couple of turns, it grows a new arm. So to minimize damage, you need to absolutely flatten it as soon as it's vulnerable. Which is still no problem with Power Lift. We pull into Poshley Heights and... I've probably played this game too many times, I just instinctively grabbed every star piece out of muscle memory. It feels kind of weird to grab the star in front of all the dark boos, but that's the 6th one, so only 1 star remains. Chapter 7, the chapter most known for how epic and dramatic it is to walk back to every previous region to find General White. Dodging enemies on the moon was a bit more difficult than normal, but as soon as we enter the X-Naut Fortress, we have an encounter we can't dodge. And would you believe that these guys are still vulnerable to Gale Force? Their base odds aren't even that low. This is an enemy base in the 8th chapter. I couldn't intentionally fail at Not Chuck Quizmo's game to fight the Cross Yucks for XP, and I actually had to answer his questions correctly this time, but otherwise we can just walk our way to the factory room. It was a bit harder to hit this switch with the X-Nerd there, but you can save a bit of time by using a super jump to get back onto these platforms. This took me several minutes. This did not save me time. The boss fight is Magnus von Grapple, but again, since he has a lot more health and damage, the threat of his X-Fists is a lot higher, so I used all the damage boosting badges I had and added 70 HP to the count. And 1 more crystal star, I guess. With all crystal stars collected, we can enter the Thousand Year Door itself, which apparently Grotus already entered. Has anyone else thought about that? If all the bad guys already went through the door, why did the sheer power of it opening crack the walls now? The Hidden Spikes room was a bit more challenging, trying to avoid the spikes and the Swooper, Swoopula, Swampire, Keese, the bat things. But that brought us to the Dark Bones, the final of the species, and let's just say I've got a bone to pick with them. It honestly wasn't too bad. It was actually easier than the Red Bones fight, since they're weaker to wind than fright. Even the Dark Bones itself, isn't this a late game boss? It was the remaining dry bozos that just refused to cooperate. I prefer to go get the Starstone before going in the tower, so the next contender in this 1000 boss fight royale is Hooktail's Goth phase. With 80 max health, this was an Olympic swimming pool in the bucket of our damage count, and at such a low level it wasn't free by any means. I probably could have found an easier strategy, but you can't tell me not to super defend the jump attack. We need to fight all of these dullards again for one of the Riddle Tower rooms, and then face off with the Three Stooges. Not much to say about it. I don't know what Grubble was cooking, but he could have conquered the world with this ability. Maybe he was the real hero for just using it to lounge in his floating WWE arena. I thought about any niche healing effects I might need to deal with here, and it made me imagine Dupless cloning Miss Mouse and using Smooch. It can't happen, but it should. That needs to be in the game. All of the remaining enemies in this complex are comically easy to avoid, so with that we reach the end of the game, the final gauntlet of fights, beginning with Grotus. This is basically the one fight I've seen people consistently use Gale Force in to remove all the Grotus X's in the room, but would you believe me if I said that having only one move with Mario and a max HP of 10 against Grotus isn't quite enough? Would you also believe me if I said that this endgame boss is still susceptible to clockout? Yeah, it's just that exasperating. In case you forgot that you have Time Stop in your back pocket at all times, you have another means to just not let the boss partake in the boss fight. With him defeated, Bowser once again proves himself as the hero, and we fight him and Kammy Koopa. I wish he wasn't banished in modern games. I checked to be certain, and although you can defeat them in either order, defeating Bowser does not end the fight. You need to fight both. So killing Kammy first is very wise in this challenge, because she doesn't just have the ability to heal Bowser, she absolutely loves to do so. Despite everything, all that's left is to chase down Grotus. Alright, so this chapter isn't looking great. But this is when I was informed of something that changed the Palace of Shadow entirely. So far, bosses have been our main source of damage. Lesser enemies can be otherwise removed from battle. In the Poshly Sanctum, we found the Garnet Star. It granted us the ability Showstopper, which is an instant KO move. I never brought it up for two reasons. First, the move shows the enemies dying, which I felt looked like dealing damage. And second, because it overlaps with Gale Force. They both remove lesser enemies, and of course, bosses wouldn't be vulnerable to one-hit KO moves. So, you can probably see where this is going. Most bosses and mini-bosses in the game are immune, with the exception of almost every boss in the Palace of Shadow. Darkbones, Gloomtail, Beldum, Merlin, and Dupless, Grotus, Bowser, and Kammy Koopa can all be one-shot with Showstopper. This leaves the moral dilemma of if Showstopper is damage or not. Now, knowing the potential this move has, I rethought my stance on it. As I mentioned in the beginning, my goal is to find the minimum damage, allowing anything intended in the game, anything besides glitches. The final nail in the not-so-metaphorical coffin was the nature of Showstopper behind the scenes. It doesn't deal damage, it applies a status effect. The move is really weird. It applies an instant KO status effect that causes afflicted enemies to spontaneously unalive themselves. So, after some more thought, the clearest, most unambiguous way to define damage is when the damage icon appears. All other attacking special moves make it appear, but Fright Masks don't, Gale Force doesn't, and since it's a status effect, neither does Showstopper. Now, we can redo the Palace of Shadow. This time, all we need to do is use Showstopper on each boss, with odds ranging from 1 in 20 to 1 in 100. Unlike Gale Force, this operates like other status effects such as Dizzy and Sleep. Each enemy has a static weakness. There's no way to increase it. It would sure suck to have bad luck here. We won't talk about how long that took. Let's instead talk about how much damage it saved. We already dealt no damage to the Darkbones, but the other bosses on their own account for 360 damage. So, with that nuts hash dealt with, as Goombella so eloquently puts it, we're in a much better position heading into the last challenge. While Grotus was enacting his plan, I was too preoccupied for a brief moment watching this mushroom take a walk on its own, but then it was time for the final boss. This is interesting because there's a lot of nuance in this boss fight. She takes on her true form, but when exactly does she do that? I looked up information and every source I could find just said after enough damage. That's real helpful. The only source that gave any specific number was the dreaded fandom wiki, the same one that starts the trivia section claiming she's the most powerful character in the Mario universe with no citation. It said you need to deal 60 damage, but I would trust an old Game FAQs guide before that, so I did some experimenting to confirm that the first phase does end after dealing 60 HP of damage. It also claims that you only need to deal 39 damage in the Japanese version. I don't have a copy of the Japanese version lying around to test that on, but there you go, Japanese players can deal 21 less damage. I say can, because the real challenge here is dealing precisely that damage, while not dying. If we buff ourselves like the god Grubba wished he was, it would be impossible to stop at a precise number. Thankfully, we can buff with Powerlift, then swap partners to someone unbuffed to deal less damage, getting her down to exactly 90 HP. Her second phase isn't a problem for dealing too much damage, because we can't deal any damage. Instead, the problem is we're weak to dying. Surviving this phase is a lot more difficult when we're at 10 HP, and it probably would have been a bit easier if I had used that booze sheet I've been hoarding the whole game. But that's why God gave us the B button. I didn't say he gave me good timing. It took maybe a few attempts, but since my partners at this point are bullet sponges with quadruple Mario's health, all it took was her having particular beef with one of them. That gives us the whole look at all the people you helped cutscene. Hopefully they learn to stop showing up to these battles, but it also gives us something far more important. This is where you need to finish her entire HP pool of 150. But you know what would combo really well with Powerlift? Maybe a guaranteed bingo? I guess to give you an audience dumb enough to show up after what just happened, the game guarantees a Shine Sprite bingo no matter how bad your timing is. This requires 3 successful attacks, 2 to roll the first 2 Shine Sprites, and 1 to initiate the bingo. This means we can make 3 moves and take 1 turn of damage before fully restoring everything. I don't think they considered how broken this could be. I entertained the idea of using Powerlift again as a flex, but I don't think double dipping on it would have even been necessary when I remember the volume of damage I'm already dealing with 1. The Shadow Queen apparently still has beef with my other partners, so it only took a few power bounces to carve through her entire HP reserve. So as the credits roll, we get to reflect on the people we've met, the memories we've made, the challenges we've faced, and the sheer boatload of damage we had to deal. Throughout the journey of Gems and Violence, you need to deal a total of 822 damage, which, by the way, would have been 1,182 damage without Showstopper. And for the sake of curiosity, here's a chart for how much damage was dealt in each chapter. It's mostly as I'd thought, but the final chapter is closer than I expected now that we have Showstopper, and considering we could blow away most enemies, I'm surprised that Chapter 3 was still so high. It makes sense why the Glitz Pit has the most post-game content now. Mario belongs more in a mosh pit than anything else. As I alluded to at the beginning, it might be interesting to see what this would look like without Fright or Gale Force. If it's different enough from a minimum turns run, it might be a future video. I hope you enjoyed the video. I wanted to loop back to a Paper Mario challenge, but I still plan to make videos on a variety of games. Most of my free time while working on this video was spent in Silksong, so who knows, maybe content on that at some point. Whatever the next video is going to be in a few weeks, I hope you'll be there for it. Subscribe, I guess, and until next time.